Welcome back to Fiction Flux, everyone. Today, we've got an exciting new fanfiction. What if Deku got teleported to rezero and fell in love with Emilia? It's going to be a wild ride filled with action, emotions, and surprises. So let's not waste any time, let's dive right in. Deku's head spun as he tumbled through the vortex. One moment, he was standing in the streets of Japan, fighting off villains with his friends, and the next, he was somewhere completely different. The world around him blurred into an overwhelming swirl of colors, and his senses dulled as he felt himself plummeting into an unknown abyss. When the disorienting fall finally stopped, he found himself lying on cold stone. His breath came in ragged gasps as his hand searched for purchase, the rocky ground rough against his palms. He blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of his surroundings. The air was cool, the faint scent of trees and earth mingling in the breeze. But what was more concerning was the looming forest ahead, an eerie, yet strangely beautiful landscape. Where am I? Deku pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the dizziness, and surveyed his surroundings. He was in a forest. The trees towered above him, their branches twisting in unnatural shapes, and the ground was littered with large, jagged stones. He could hear the distant chirps of birds, but the atmosphere felt tense. Like something was waiting. In the distance, a figure approached. She was tall, with silver hair and striking purple eyes that seemed almost too bright. She wore a flowing purple dress and carried an air of grace, yet there was a palpable sadness that clung to her presence. She stepped closer, noticing Deku's disoriented state. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice sharp, almost cold. "And how did you get here?" Deku stumbled back, raising his hands defensively. I'm not sure. One moment I was with my friends, and then, I ended up here." His voice wavered, the shock of the situation hitting him hard. The woman's eyes narrowed. "So, you're not from here?" She crossed her arms, her gaze softening just a little. "I'm Emilia. And you're very far from home." Deku could only nod, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in reality. "I don't know how to get back," he admitted, his voice quiet, defeated. Emilia sighed, turning away, clearly uninterested in his plight. "I don't have time to help you. I have my own mission to worry about. You're on your own." With that, she began to walk away, her steps firm and resolute. Deku stood there, staring at her retreating form, a little crestfallen. He didn't know how long he had been standing there, but he couldn't just let it go. He had to try. "Wait, please," he called after her. She stopped, glancing over her shoulder, her face unreadable. "What is it now?" I want to help. I don't know why I'm here, but if there's anything I can do, I want to help." Deku's words spilled out, his passion shining through despite the overwhelming confusion. Emilia studied him for a moment, her expression cold. "You want to help. You don't even know where you are. And you think you can help me?" Deku nodded fervently. "I may not know this world, but I can't just stand by when people need help. I've trained my whole life to protect people, and he paused, catching his breath. "I can't give up now, even if I'm somewhere strange." Emilia was silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softening just slightly. "You're naive. But, fine. If you really want to follow me, I won't stop you. But know this world is dangerous. And you'll regret getting involved." "I won't regret it," Deku replied, a firm resolve in his voice. "I promise." The days that followed were anything but easy. Deku had no quirks here, no one for all, no superhuman strength. He was just a boy, thrown into a world full of magic, monsters, and danger. But what he lacked in power, he made up for in determination. Despite her initial indifference, Emilia couldn't help but notice Deku's persistence. He was always there when needed, whether it was protecting a village from a pack of wolves or standing up to a band of thieves. Even without his powers, he found ways to help, using his quick thinking, resourcefulness, and his innate ability to inspire others. But it wasn't just his actions that caught her attention, it was the way he looked at her. His eyes were filled with understanding, empathy, and a kindness that was so rare in her life. He didn't look at her as a princess or a candidate for the throne, he looked at her like she was just a person, like he was willing to stand by her no matter what. It was this kindness that slowly began to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. Emilia had always kept people at a distance, afraid of being hurt, afraid of the power that she carried. But Deku was different. He didn't ask for anything in return. He simply wanted to help. One evening, as they sat by a campfire, Emilia glanced over at him. Deku was quietly tending to the fire, his face lit by its warm glow, his expression focused but gentle. She couldn't help but watch him for a moment, feeling a warmth in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. "You've changed things," Emilia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Deku turned to look at her, his bright green eyes reflecting the firelight. "What do you mean? I've always been afraid of letting people in," Emilia admitted, her voice shaky. "Afraid of trusting anyone. But you make it seem so easy. You always believe in people, no matter what." She hesitated, her gaze falling to the ground. "And I'm scared that one day, you'll leave. Because you're too good for this world, Deku." Deku looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm not going anywhere, Emilia. As long as you need me, I'll be here. That's what a hero does. And you're not alone, not anymore." Her heart skipped a beat. It was then that she realized just how much she had come to care for him. How much his unwavering kindness had started to heal the broken parts of her heart. Emilia opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a loud crash echoed from the woods. The crackling of the campfire was suddenly drowned out by a loud crash, followed by the sounds of heavy footsteps approaching rapidly from the forest. Deku's instincts kicked in, and he immediately jumped to his feet, his eyes scanning the darkness. His muscles tensed, ready to face whatever threat was coming, even though he had no powers here. "Stay back, Emilia," he shouted, positioning himself in front of her as if he could somehow protect her with nothing but his willpower. Emilia's eyes widened, but there was no time to protest. From the shadows, two massive creatures emerged, large, brutish figures with glowing red eyes and enormous claws. They were unlike anything Deku had ever seen before, towering over him with a fierce and predatory aura. "What the hell are those things?" Deku muttered under his breath, fists clenched at his sides. Emilia's expression hardened as she stood up beside him, her face set with determination. "They're beasts of the forest. Strong and relentless. I've dealt with them before, but it's been a long time." The creatures growled lowly, their movements slow and methodical as they advanced, the ground trembling beneath their feet. One of the beasts let out a deafening roar and charged at them with terrifying speed. Without thinking, Deku sprang into action, rushing toward the beast. He wasn't sure what he could do with no quirks, but he couldn't just stand there and let Emilia get hurt. His body moved on instinct, sidestepping the beast's clawed swipe and attempting to land a kick to its side. The creature howled, stumbling back, but it quickly recovered, turning to face him with an enraged look. Deku's breath came in sharp bursts as he tried to assess the situation. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep dodging the beast's strikes without making a solid plan. Meanwhile, Emilia summoned a small but powerful magical barrier, casting it between herself and the other beast that had stayed behind. Her magic shimmered in the air, but the beast simply snarled, slamming against the barrier with overwhelming force. Deku's mind raced. He could see Emilia struggling to maintain the barrier as the beast pounded against it. But she wasn't giving up. He admired her strength, but there was no time for admiration now. He needed to act fast. "Emilia," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I need you to focus. We can take them down together. I'll distract them." Without waiting for a response, Deku dove forward, using his agility to duck and weave around the beast's attacks. He had no quirk to empower him, but he had something just as important, his will to protect. He needed to keep the creature's attention on him long enough for Emilia to use her magic effectively. The beast lunged at him again, its claws slashing through the air. Deku barely avoided it, twisting his body to land a solid punch to the beast's jaw. The hit wasn't enough to stop it, but it made the creature hesitate, giving him a small window of opportunity. From behind, Emilia's voice rang out, filled with determination. "Ice wall," she cried. In an instant, a massive wall of ice erupted from the ground, encasing the beast in a thick, crystalline prison. It howled in fury, struggling against the ice that trapped it, but it was unable to break free. Deku breathed heavily, his eyes locking with Emilia's for the first time since the fight began. There was a moment of silence as they both stood, catching their breath. The beast on the other side of the ice wall was still trying to break free, but it was clear that it was only a matter of time before the magical barrier would hold. "Well done," Deku said, his voice filled with admiration. "You did it." Emilia's face flushed, her breath heavy as she wiped sweat from her brow. "Thanks for distracting it, I couldn't have done it without you." Deku smiled, his heart pounding from both the fight and the closeness of the moment. "That's what heroes do. We help each other." For the first time since he arrived in this strange world, Emilia's icy demeanor softened, and she smiled back at him. It wasn't a big smile, but it was enough for Deku to notice the shift in her. Her voice was quieter now, but still strong. "You really are different. I didn't expect someone like you to come into my life, especially with how strange and complicated things are here." Deku didn't have the words to express how he felt in that moment. He wasn't sure where they stood yet, but he knew one thing for sure: he wanted to be there for her, just like he promised. And as they watched the last of the creatures retreat into the forest, a silent bond formed between them. It wasn't just about the battle anymore, it was about trust. And perhaps, more than that. The night fell silent once more, the stars twinkling high above, but in that moment, it felt like the whole world had shifted, just a little. The fire crackled softly as the night settled into an eerie calm. The air felt cool against their skin, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the clearing moments ago. Deku sat down near the campfire, his breathing still a bit uneven from the battle, but a sense of relief washed over him as he glanced over at Emilia. She was standing by the ice wall, her back to him as she surveyed the remnants of the battle. It wasn't until a few moments passed that she turned back to him, her expression more contemplative than before. "Thank you for protecting me," she said quietly, her voice almost shy in a way Deku hadn't expected. Deku blinked, still processing everything that had happened. "It's nothing. I told you, I won't leave you. Not when you're in danger." Emilia looked down at her hands, a slight frown crossing her face. "I've never been one to rely on others, especially not like this. I always thought it was better to handle things on my own." Deku tilted his head, feeling a pull of empathy for her. He could understand that feeling all too well. "I get it. I used to think that way too. But sometimes, we all need a little help. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." She looked at him then, and for the first time, Deku noticed how vulnerable she seemed in that moment. The tough, regal demeanor she usually carried seemed to fall away, replaced with a more raw and real version of herself. "I've been carrying this burden alone for so long, trying to prove I'm worthy. That I'm not just some half-breed or a failed candidate," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. Deku's heart ached hearing her speak like that. It reminded him of his own struggles, his own doubts about being worthy of the mantle of a hero. He stood up slowly, approaching her with a tentative step. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," he said gently, his voice filled with sincerity. "You're not alone in this world, Emilia. And you don't have to carry all that weight by yourself. I'm here." Emilia's eyes softened, but she quickly averted her gaze, unsure how to respond. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to accept that she could lean on him, but years of solitude and self-doubt had built walls that were hard to tear down. They stood in silence for a moment, the fire casting long shadows around them. Deku, sensing the weight of the silence, spoke up again. "Look, I may not know this world, and I may not have the strength that you're used to, but I know one thing: I won't back down. I'll always be there, even if it means putting myself in danger for you." Emilia glanced at him, and for a split second, there was something in her gaze, something soft, something that Deku couldn't quite place. "I don't know if I can let someone in again, Deku," she said quietly. "Not after everything I've been through. Not after all the loss and pain." Deku understood. He really did. But he also knew that sometimes, people needed someone to show them that it was okay to trust again, even after everything had gone wrong. "You don't have to rush into it," he said, his voice full of understanding. Take your time. I'll still be here. I want to help you. And I want to protect you." There was a long pause before Emilia spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why? Why are you so willing to help me? I'm just a stranger to you." Deku looked at her, his eyes steady and earnest. "Because you're not just a stranger to me. I see you, Emilia. I see the person who's been trying so hard to do the right thing, even when the world doesn't make it easy. And I admire that more than you know. You don't need to carry everything on your own." Emilia's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, she saw the depth of his sincerity, the quiet strength behind his words. She had spent so long closing herself off, but here was Deku, offering a hand, asking for nothing in return. Her heart, guarded and hardened for so long, softened a little more. "Thank you, Deku," she murmured. Deku smiled, though there was still a quiet sadness in his expression. "You're welcome." As the night deepened, the two of them sat together by the fire, a comfortable silence settling between them. The bond they had started to form, however fragile it was, felt real. Deku knew that there was much more to Emilia than the tough exterior she showed the world, and he was determined to help her find the strength to let go of the burdens she carried alone. Emilia, for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to feel something other than loneliness. She felt something that was difficult to admit, a growing warmth in her chest when she thought of Deku. The stars above sparkled brightly in the vast night sky, and it felt as though, in this strange and dangerous world, they had both found a small piece of peace. The following days were a blur of travel, tension, and small victories. Deku and Emilia had begun to work together more seamlessly, despite the odds stacked against them. But there were still moments, quiet moments, like when they were resting by the fire, that Deku couldn't help but feel drawn to her more and more. He had promised to be there for her, and he meant it. But as the days passed, his feelings began to grow beyond simple admiration. He found himself thinking about her more often, wanting to make her smile, wanting to protect her not just because it was the right thing to do, but because it felt important. Emilia had started to show a bit more vulnerability, a bit more trust in him with each passing day. The cold walls she'd built around her heart seemed to be eroding, little by little. And though she didn't speak about it, Deku could feel it. It was like a quiet promise hanging between them, that they weren't alone anymore. But Deku's heart was still heavy with the knowledge that he wasn't supposed to be here. His mind was always drifting back to his own world, his friends, his family. Could he ever truly belong in this strange place? Or was he destined to return to his own world, leaving Emilia behind? As the two walked through the dense forest one afternoon, the thought gnawed at him. But for now, all he could do was focus on the present. Emilia needed him, and he wouldn't let her down. The days continued to pass in a blur of travel, danger, and unexpected moments of quiet connection. Emilia's trust in Deku grew, and with it, her belief that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had once thought. She no longer viewed him as an outsider or some lost soul from another world. He had become a constant in her life, and despite her attempts to keep her distance, she couldn't deny the growing attachment she felt toward him. Deku, on the other hand, was beginning to feel something deeper. The way she looked at him when he helped, the quiet moments they shared by the fire, the way she seemed to relax a little more when he was around, all of it tugged at his heart. He had never imagined that he would be in a world like this, fighting alongside someone like her. But the more time they spent together, the more he couldn't help but feel that he had found something worth fighting for beyond returning to his world. They reached a small village on the outskirts of the forest one evening, the sun beginning to set behind the hills. The village was peaceful, its buildings made of wood and stone, with the occasional lantern glowing in the windows. The villagers, upon seeing Emilia, greeted her warmly, though there was still some wariness in their eyes when they glanced at Deku. He was, after all, still a stranger to this world. "Do you think we'll be able to stay here for a while?" Deku asked, his voice low as they approached the village gates. Emilia nodded, though her expression was unreadable. "I hope so. We could use some rest. And it might be a good place to regroup before we continue on." The villagers seemed to recognize Emilia immediately. She was no ordinary traveler, and her presence brought a sense of security to the town. But despite the warm greetings, there was an underlying tension. Deku could feel it, the way the villagers eyed them both with some unease. He couldn't help but wonder if it had something to do with Emilia's past, the mysteries that surrounded her, the fear that people often had of her. After a brief exchange with the village elder, they were shown to a small inn where they could stay for the night. As they entered their room, the weight of their journey seemed to settle around them. Deku set down his pack and looked over at Emilia, who was standing by the window, staring out at the peaceful village below. "Is everything all right?" Deku asked, noticing the far-off look in her eyes. Emilia's gaze didn't waver from the view outside. "I've been here before. This village, it holds a lot of memories for me. Some good, some not so good." She paused, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I came here years ago, seeking help when I first left my home. The people here were kind, but there was always a distance between us. They treated me like I was a threat, even though I never asked for it." Deku listened quietly, feeling the weight of her words. "It must have been tough, feeling like you didn't belong." Emilia turned to face him, her eyes a little glassy. "It was. But it's the reality I live with. People are afraid of what they don't understand, Deku. And I can't change that. No matter how much I try." Deku stepped closer, his voice steady. "You don't have to change anything, Emilia. You're more than enough just the way you are." Emilia's breath hitched at his words, and for a moment, she was silent, contemplating. She had spent so long hiding behind walls, pushing others away to protect herself. But with Deku, something was different. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just offering a hand, a shoulder, and his presence, unwavering in its sincerity. "You really believe that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Deku nodded, his expression earnest. "I do. I believe in you, Emilia." There was a long pause as their eyes locked, the unspoken bond between them growing stronger with each passing second. Emilia, for the first time, felt herself letting go of the wall she had built. There was something about Deku's kindness, his pure heart, that made it hard not to want to reach out, to trust him, to let him in. She took a small step forward, closing the gap between them. "I've never let anyone get this close before. But with you." Deku smiled gently, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I don't need you to let me in, Emilia. I'm already here." Her breath caught in her throat, the words sinking in like a quiet promise. And for the first time, she felt a sense of peace, something she hadn't felt in so long. She didn't have to face everything alone anymore. That night, after a simple dinner in the village inn, they lay down to rest. The room was quiet, the only sounds being the occasional crackling of the fire and the distant chirping of insects outside. Deku lay on one side of the room, his thoughts racing. It was hard to quiet his mind. He had never been so uncertain about his place in the world. And yet, here, with Emilia, he felt something that made the thought of leaving this world seem unbearable. He couldn't deny the growing feelings for her. But he also knew the reality: he was a stranger here, an outsider in a world that wasn't his own. And he didn't know what his future held. Would he ever return to his world? Or was he meant to stay here, in this strange place, with her? As he lay there, his thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice from across the room. "Deku." He turned to see Emilia sitting on the edge of the bed, her gaze distant, yet somehow more open than it had ever been before. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, they were silent, the weight of their shared experiences between them. I think I'm starting to understand what you meant," Emilia said softly. "About not being alone." Deku's heart skipped a beat as he sat up, their eyes locking once more. He wanted to say something, to offer some reassurance, but all he could do was smile gently. "Yeah, you're not alone anymore. Not with me here." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Everything outside the room, everything that existed in the world around them, seemed irrelevant. They were two people, finding solace in each other, in a world that was so full of uncertainty. And as the night wore on, with the stars glowing above them, both of them began to realize that perhaps their paths had crossed for a reason. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something far more significant than either of them could have anticipated. The night stretched on, the quiet of the inn filling the space between them, but there was a certain tension, a sense of something unspoken lingering in the air. Deku watched as Emilia stared out the window again, her eyes distant, her expression unreadable. He knew she was deep in thought, perhaps pondering everything they had just talked about, or maybe she was still struggling with her past, with the weight of everything she had carried alone for so long. Deku couldn't help but feel the tug in his chest, an overwhelming desire to help her, to be the one to ease that burden she had carried for so long. He wanted to be her support, to protect her, but even more, he wanted to be the person who made her smile when things got dark. "Emilia," he started quietly, his voice low, not wanting to break the fragile silence too suddenly. She turned her head toward him, her gaze softening when their eyes met. "Yeah." Deku hesitated, unsure of how to phrase his thoughts, but knowing he had to say something. "I know you've been through a lot, and I can't pretend to understand everything you've gone through. But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. I know I'm not from this world, but I want to be someone you can rely on. You don't have to face things alone." Emilia's eyes glistened with a mixture of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite place. For a moment, she was silent, just watching him, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she walked over to him and sat beside him on the edge of the bed, her body close, though not quite touching. "I appreciate that, Deku," she said, her voice soft, almost fragile. "I really do. But I don't know if I'm ready to let someone in completely. I've been hurt too many times before." Deku's heart sank a little at her words, but he understood. The walls she had built around herself weren't easy to tear down. He couldn't force her to open up, but he could wait. He would wait as long as it took. He wasn't going anywhere. "I get it," Deku said gently. "I'm not asking for you to suddenly trust me completely. I know that's not something that happens overnight. But I want you to know that, no matter what, I'm here. I'll wait until you're ready." Emilia's expression softened, her eyes. The gesture caught Deku off guard, but it was one that filled him with warmth. Emilia's head rested gently against his shoulder, a vulnerable moment that she hadn't shown anyone in a long time, perhaps ever. For a brief second, it felt as though the weight of her past, the burden of everything she had gone through, lifted just enough for her to allow herself some comfort. Deku's heart thudded in his chest, but he didn't move, not wanting to disturb the delicate balance that had formed between them. Instead, he kept his body still, offering her the space she needed, just as he had promised. He wanted to protect her, to keep her safe, and for now, this simple act of her leaning on him felt like a sign that, perhaps, she was starting to let her guard down. "It's been so long since I've felt like this," Emilia murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like I can breathe. I've been running from everything for so long, I don't know if I even remember what it feels like to trust someone." Deku nodded, understanding her hesitation, knowing the weight of such words. He had his own doubts, his own fears, he wasn't sure if he belonged in this world, if he would ever return to his own, but he did know one thing, he was committed to standing by her, no matter what came next. "You don't have to trust me all at once," he said softly. "Take your time, I'll be here, we'll figure this out together." Emilia raised her head slightly, looking up at him with an unreadable expression. There was a flicker in her eyes, a vulnerability that she hadn't allowed anyone to see in years. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't awkward or uncomfortable. Instead, it was a shared understanding, a quiet moment of connection. "I don't know why you're so kind to me," Emilia admitted, her voice still soft. "You don't owe me anything. And yet, here you are, standing by me even when I'm difficult and distant." Deku turned to face her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I'm not doing it because I feel like I have to. I'm doing it because I want to. Because I see the person you are beneath everything. I don't want you to have to carry this all by yourself anymore." Emilia's eyes softened, a warmth spreading across her face that Deku had rarely seen before. She looked at him, and in her gaze, he saw a flicker of something deeper, something more than just gratitude. It was an understanding, a recognition of the bond that was starting to form between them, slowly but surely. "You really are different, Deku," she whispered, almost to herself. He smiled gently, but there was a trace of uncertainty in his eyes. "Maybe, but that's okay, right? I don't need to be like everyone else. I just need to be here for you." The quiet settled over them again, but this time, it was more peaceful, more comforting. Emilia shifted her weight, curling her knees up slightly as she turned her head to rest on his shoulder again. She didn't speak for a while, and neither did he. There was something calming about the shared silence. In that moment, it felt like the world outside didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the quiet bond between them. The following days brought them new challenges, as they journeyed further into the unknown regions of the world, but there was a new sense of calm that surrounded them. They had learned to work together seamlessly, each relying on the other in moments of danger, but also finding comfort in the quiet moments between their battles. One afternoon, as they crossed a bridge over a wide river, Emilia caught a glimpse of something in the distance, something that sent a shiver down her spine. A dark figure, standing alone on the far side of the riverbank. There was something ominous about the silhouette, and for a moment, the air seemed to grow heavier. "Deku," Emilia whispered, her voice tense. "Do you see that?" Deku squinted into the distance, his heart picking up pace. "Yeah, I see it. Who do you think that is?" "I don't know, but something doesn't feel right," Emilia replied, her posture stiffening. "It's like, I've seen them before, but not like this." Deku took a deep breath, his instincts immediately kicking into overdrive. "We need to approach cautiously. I'll take the lead." Emilia nodded, a spark of determination flashing in her eyes. She knew she wasn't alone in this anymore. They were in this together, just like they'd promised. As they moved toward the figure, the tension in the air thickened. The closer they got, the clearer it became that whoever stood before them was no ordinary traveler. The silhouette slowly took form, a tall, cloaked figure, its face obscured by shadows. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge their presence. It simply stood there, as if waiting for them to approach. "Who are you?" Deku called out, his voice firm, his body poised for action. The figure's head turned slowly toward them, and a pair of glowing eyes met Deku's. There was something unsettling about them, cold, calculating. "I've been waiting for you," the figure said, its voice a low rasp that sent a chill through the air. "You don't belong here. Not in this world. You never did." Deku's heart skipped a beat. How did this person know about him? About his origin? "Who are you?" he repeated, this time more urgently, his muscles tense and ready for whatever might come next. The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, it let out a soft laugh, one that sent a shiver down Deku's spine. "You'll understand soon enough," the figure said cryptically, stepping back into the shadows, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Emilia was left standing in stunned silence beside him, her expression grave. "Deku, who was that? What did they mean?" Deku didn't have an answer, but a sense of unease settled in his chest. Whoever this person was, they knew more than they were letting on. And they weren't the only ones who knew Deku wasn't supposed to be in this world. "We need to stay alert," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We can't let our guard down." Emilia nodded, though her eyes were filled with questions. They had already faced so much, how much more could they endure before the truth of why Deku had been brought here revealed itself? The unsettling encounter with the mysterious figure left a heavy silence between Deku and Emilia as they continued their journey. The bridge they had crossed now seemed distant, like a past they were trying to leave behind, but the chill that lingered from that moment seemed to follow them like a shadow. Whoever that figure was, they had no doubt that they had just scratched the surface of something far more dangerous and mysterious. They pressed on through the dense forest, the landscape growing darker as the evening sun began to set. The air around them felt heavier, charged with the strange sense that they weren't alone. Every rustle in the trees, every shift of the wind, made Deku's muscles tense. His instincts were on high alert now, scanning their surroundings as he walked beside Emilia. Emilia, however, had fallen silent, her expression distant as she tried to piece together what had just happened. She had been so sure that the world she had known had its rules, its dangerous forces and its strange politics, but now, the presence of this new threat felt like a ripple in the fabric of everything she understood. "Deku," she said after a while, breaking the quiet that had settled between them. "That figure, they spoke like they knew you. Or at least knew you didn't belong here." Deku's heart skipped a beat. The thought had been gnawing at him since they'd parted ways with the cloaked figure, but hearing it from Emilia made the truth of it sink in. Whoever this person was, they had knowledge that no one should have. "I don't know how they knew about me," Deku admitted, his voice quiet but steady. "But I feel like I'm starting to get the sense that this world might not just be random. Maybe there's a reason I was brought here. Something bigger than just me getting lost." Emilia glanced at him, her eyes thoughtful. "Could it have something to do with your powers? Your quirk?" Her gaze softened, remembering the way Deku had fought so fiercely to protect her, his abilities unlike anything she had seen before in this world. It made her wonder if his presence here wasn't just coincidence. Maybe you're here for a reason, or maybe someone brought you here on purpose. The thought weighed heavily on Deku's chest, but he shook his head, trying to push the worry aside. He had always fought for what was right, for the people he cared about. That hadn't changed, even in this strange new world. "Whatever the reason, I can't go back. Not yet. But if I have to face whatever this is, whatever I'm meant to do here, I'll do it. I won't leave you behind, Emilia. I won't leave anyone behind." Emilia stopped walking for a moment, her face softening as she looked at him. His words were simple but sincere, and they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. She had never met anyone like him, someone so determined, so steadfast in their convictions, and yet, still carrying the vulnerability that came with truly caring for others. "Thank you, Deku," she said quietly. Her voice was still a bit shaken, but there was a warmth in it now, a trust that hadn't been there before. I'm starting to believe that maybe I can depend on you, even if it's hard for me to accept." Deku smiled, though a hint of uncertainty lingered in his eyes. "It's okay. You don't have to accept anything right away. I'll be here when you're ready. Always." They resumed walking, and as they moved deeper into the forest, the path becoming steeper and harder to navigate, their bond seemed to grow, even if neither of them knew exactly where it was heading. The following day, they arrived at a small, quiet town nestled in the valley between towering mountains. It was a peaceful place, with cobblestone streets and houses built into the sides of the hills, their rooftops dotted with thatched straw. Villagers greeted them warmly, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air as they walked through the town square. For the first time in a while, things felt normal. They found a small inn and checked in, taking a brief respite from the dangers that had followed them. The room they were given was simple but comfortable. It had a bed, a small table by the window, and a soft, inviting glow from the fire that crackled in the hearth. But even in this peaceful setting, Deku couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Every glance he exchanged with Emilia seemed to carry the weight of the things they hadn't yet spoken about. The mystery of the cloaked figure still loomed large, and they both knew it was only a matter of time before they encountered whatever it was that had been pulling them into the center of something far greater than either of them had imagined. They sat at the small table by the window, the firelight flickering against their faces as the evening wore on. "I've been thinking," Emilia began, breaking the quiet once again. "About what that person said. About how they said you didn't belong here." Deku looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "Yeah, it's been bothering me, too. What if there's something more to this than just me showing up here by accident?" Emilia leaned forward, her eyes intense as she spoke. "What if you were chosen for a reason? What if someone, or something, brought you here for a purpose?" The words hung in the air, as if the very thought had the power to change everything. Deku couldn't help but shudder at the idea. He hadn't considered that, but deep down, it made sense. There had been too many strange things happening, too many moments that felt like they were leading up to something. Something big. "I don't want to think that I was dragged here for some greater plan," Deku said, his voice soft but firm. "But I know one thing, I won't let it control me." I'm here for a reason, yes, but I'm here to protect people, to help people. No matter what happens next. Emilia looked at him, her gaze soft but thoughtful. She could see the resolve in his eyes, and it made something in her chest flutter. Even in the face of uncertainty, even when the truth of his presence in this world was shrouded in mystery, Deku's purpose had never wavered. He had come here to be a hero, and that was exactly what he was. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his ever so slightly. I know you will. And I'll be right here beside you. No matter what we face. Deku's heart skipped a beat at the touch, the sincerity in her words settling into him like a quiet promise. He nodded, his hand briefly squeezing hers. Together, they had come so far. And no matter what happened next, they would face it together. The quiet moment in the inn felt like a brief reprieve from the chaos and uncertainty of the world they were caught in. Deku and Emilia sat in companionable silence, the warmth of the fire casting long shadows across the room. But as the minutes passed, the calm seemed fragile, like the calm before the storm. Deku couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the horizon, something far darker and more dangerous than they had yet encountered. And the words of the cloaked figure, the one who had spoken of him not belonging in this world, echoed in his mind. What did that figure know? And why did it feel like the world was shifting, pulling him deeper into its mysteries? Emilia, on the other hand, had fallen into a contemplative silence. Her thoughts were consumed with the strange, unsettling encounter they had experienced, and with the growing sense that everything in her life was being upended by Deku's presence. She had always known her life would be difficult, her past, her powers, and the danger that followed her, but now, with Deku by her side, there was a feeling of uncertainty in the air. It wasn't just the mystery of Deku's origin, but the unsettling realization that the two of them were becoming entangled in something far more complex than either of them could have imagined. We can't ignore it forever, Emilia said, her voice breaking the silence between them. The figure from yesterday, and what they said, we have to find out more. If there's some kind of reason you're here, some kind of purpose, I think we need to uncover it before whatever's coming finds us first. Deku nodded slowly, his thoughts mirroring hers. You're right, but I'm not sure where to start. This world is so different from mine. And that person, they seem to know things about me that I don't even understand. Emilia's eyes darkened with thought. There has to be someone who can help us. Someone who understands the bigger picture. There was a long pause before she stood up, moving toward the window. The sky outside had darkened, the stars beginning to twinkle above, but the air felt thick with tension. Maybe we should speak to someone who knows this world better than we do. Someone with more knowledge of the forces that are at work here. Deku stood as well, crossing the room to join her by the window. You think there's someone in the town who could help? I don't know, Emilia said, her voice pensive. But we've got to find out. There's a lot we don't understand, and if we don't figure it out soon, I'm afraid we might not get another chance. Deku glanced out the window, his heart heavy with the uncertainty of the situation. He had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this was different. He wasn't just trying to be a hero in his own world anymore, he was caught in a world where he didn't belong, with no clear way of returning home. And the only thing he had in his favor was his determination, and the trust that Emilia had begun to place in him. I'll go with you, Deku said, his voice firm. Emilia looked at him, surprised but grateful. You're really willing to do this? Even though we don't know who we're looking for. Yeah, Deku replied, his gaze unwavering. I'll do whatever it takes to get to the bottom of this. If I'm here for a reason, then I need to know what it is. Emilia smiled faintly, the warmth of the gesture unexpected but comforting. Thank you, Deku. I don't think I could face this on my own. Without another word, the two of them left the room, stepping out into the quiet village streets under the cover of night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting pale light across the town, making the cobblestone paths look almost ethereal. The quiet of the village was unsettling, as if everyone had retreated into their homes to avoid the creeping sense of danger that had followed them both. They made their way to the village square, where the faint glow of lanterns flickered in the distance. As they walked, Emilia's thoughts were consumed with the same feeling that had been growing stronger ever since they had arrived, the sense that they were being watched. It was subtle at first, like a fleeting shadow on the edge of their vision. But the closer they got to the center of town, the more pronounced it became. Suddenly, a figure appeared before them, stepping out from an alleyway with a swift and calculated motion. Deku's senses immediately went on high alert, his body tensing as he instinctively stepped in front of Emilia, his gaze sharp. The figure was tall, cloaked in dark robes that masked their identity, much like the one from the forest. But this time, the aura felt different. More focused. More dangerous. "You're not alone anymore, are you, Deku?" the figure said, their voice low and menacing. "You've made an interesting choice by aligning yourself with her." Emilia's breath hitched. She recognized the voice. It was the same as the cloaked figure they had encountered earlier. "How do you know my name?" Deku demanded, his fists clenched in preparation for whatever came next. "Who are you?" The figure chuckled darkly, and a pair of glowing eyes glinted from beneath the hood. "I am but a messenger. Someone who knows far more about you than you realize. And as for your question," the figure took a slow step forward, the shadows of the alley seeming to shift around them. "You've been brought here for a reason, Deku. And whether you like it or not, your path is already set. You'll come to understand that soon enough." Emilia stepped closer to Deku, her stance resolute. "We won't let you manipulate us. Whatever game you're playing, we're not interested." The figure laughed again, but this time, it lacked any humor. "Oh, Emilia, you misunderstand. This isn't about manipulation. It's about fate. The two of you are connected in ways you can't begin to comprehend. And trust me, you will need each other in the coming days." Without warning, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing from sight as if they had never been there at all. Deku stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. What was that? Who was that? Emilia's eyes were wide, a mix of fear and confusion in her gaze. "I don't know, but I feel like we're running out of time. Whoever that was, they know more about us than we do. And I think we've just become part of something much bigger than we ever expected." Deku clenched his fists, determination flooding his veins. "Whatever's coming, we'll face it together." Emilia nodded, and for the first time in what felt like a long time, she felt a flicker of hope in her chest. Whatever awaited them, whatever mysteries and dangers lay ahead, they wouldn't face it alone. Together, they would find the answers. And they would stop whatever force was pulling them into this dark fate. The night seemed to stretch on longer than usual, with the mystery of the cloaked figure still hanging in the air. Deku and Emilia stood in the quiet village square, unsure of what to do next. They had just encountered someone who knew more about Deku than anyone should, and it left them both uneasy. Deku clenched his fists, trying to push down the fear rising in his chest. "Who was that? What do they want with us?" Emilia shook her head, her face tense. "I don't know. But whoever they are, they're dangerous. We need to be careful." Deku nodded, his thoughts racing. The figure had said something that sent a chill through him. "You've been brought here for a reason." What did that mean? Was there some kind of plan for him in this world? Was he here by accident, or was he supposed to be here to fulfill some kind of purpose? "We'll find out what they know," Deku said, determination in his voice. "But first, we need to find someone who can help us. We can't just wander around waiting for answers to fall into our laps." Emilia's eyes softened as she looked at him. She knew he was right. They couldn't stay in the dark any longer. The truth was out there, and they had to find it. "Maybe there's someone in the village who can give us some answers," she suggested. "Someone who knows more about the strange things happening around us." Deku agreed, and they both turned toward the center of town. The lanterns flickered softly in the cool night air as they walked through the empty streets, their footsteps echoing off the stone buildings. As they approached a small shop at the end of the street, they saw an elderly man standing outside, sweeping the front porch. His back was hunched, but there was a kind energy to him, a warmth that made him stand out in the quiet of the night. "Excuse me, sir," Emilia called out as they approached him. "Do you know of anyone who might have information about strange happenings around here?" The old man stopped sweeping and turned to face them. His eyes were sharp, despite his age, and his wrinkled face softened with a knowing smile. "Strange happenings, you say?" he repeated, his voice raspy but friendly. "I've lived in this village for a long time, child. Seen many strange things come and go. If you're looking for answers, you should speak with the village elder. He knows more about this land and its secrets than anyone else." "Where can we find him?" Deku asked quickly. The old man pointed down the street. "Head that way, and you'll find his home at the far end of the village. Be careful, though. Not everyone here is as friendly as I am." Deku nodded his thanks and turned to Emilia. "We should go. If anyone knows what's going on, it's him." They made their way down the winding streets, the village growing quieter as they got closer to the edge. The houses here were older, worn by time, and the air felt a little colder. The sense of unease from earlier returned as they approached a large, stone building at the end of the street. It looked like it had been standing for centuries, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. "This is it," Emilia said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Deku's heart raced, but he couldn't let fear take hold now. He took a deep breath and walked toward the door, knocking firmly. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing an older man with long, silver hair and a face that seemed to have seen too much in his lifetime. His eyes were sharp, like a hawk watching its prey, but his expression was calm, almost welcoming. "Can I help you?" the elder asked, his voice deep but not unkind. "We were told you might have information about some strange events happening in the area," Deku said, keeping his tone polite but direct. The elder raised an eyebrow but stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. "Come in, then. There's much I could tell you, if you're willing to listen." They stepped inside, and the elder led them into a cozy, dimly lit room filled with shelves of old books and scrolls. A fire crackled in the corner, casting dancing shadows across the stone walls. It felt like stepping into another world, one that had been forgotten by time. "So, what brings you to me?" the elder asked, sitting down at a wooden table and motioning for them to do the same. "I can sense you're not from around here, but you've come looking for answers." Emilia exchanged a glance with Deku before speaking. "We've been seeing strange things, and someone told us that Deku was brought here for a reason. That he's part of something bigger. Do you know anything about that?" The elder's eyes softened, and he let out a long sigh. "I've heard of such things. There are many forces at work in this world. Forces that are both seen and unseen. Some are good, others, not so much." Deku leaned forward. "What do you mean? What kind of forces?" The elder looked at them both seriously now, his face full of concern. "There are ancient powers in this land, powers that have been dormant for a long time. Some of them are stirring again, and there are those who seek to use them for their own purposes. And you, Deku, are caught in the middle of it. I don't know why or how, but there's something about you that connects to these forces." Emilia's heart raced. "Is there a way to stop it?" The elder paused, choosing his words carefully. "Stopping it won't be easy. There will be dangers ahead, things you cannot even imagine. But, it's not impossible. If you work together, if you trust each other, you might be able to control what's coming." Deku stood up, determination burning in his chest. "We'll do whatever it takes. We won't let anything happen to this world, or to Emilia." The elder nodded slowly, his gaze softening slightly. "Then you must be prepared. You're not just fighting for your life anymore. You're fighting for everything around you." The weight of the elder's words settled on them as they left his home, but there was also a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. They had learned more about the forces at play in this world, and though it wasn't easy, they had resolved to face whatever came next, together. As they walked back through the village, the sun slowly began to rise in the distance, casting a golden light across the land. It was the beginning of a new day, one that would bring them closer to the answers they sought. But it was also a reminder that the journey ahead would be long, difficult, and filled with unknown dangers. But as long as they had each other, they were ready to face it. As the day broke, casting a soft light across the village, Deku and Emilia walked side by side, their minds full of the elder's words. The uncertainty still hung over them, but there was a new resolve in their steps. They had answers, yes, but they knew it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Whatever was coming, they would face it, together. The streets were now alive with villagers starting their daily routines. The quiet, peaceful atmosphere of the town felt almost out of place after the heavy conversation with the elder. Still, the tension between them was undeniable. As they reached the edge of the village, where the trees grew thick and the shadows stretched long, they paused for a moment. The air felt different now, charged with something they couldn't explain. "I don't know what's next, Deku," Emilia whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling of the wind. "But I feel like we're about to step into something much bigger than us." Deku turned to her, offering a reassuring smile, though even he wasn't sure what lay ahead. "We'll face it, Emilia. Together. No matter what." They took one last look at the village before stepping into the dense forest. They could hear the sounds of the woods surrounding them, the distant calls of animals and the whisper of leaves in the breeze, but there was an eerie stillness in the air, like the world itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, there was a strange noise behind them. It was almost like a faint whisper, carried on the wind, but it wasn't the wind. It was words, soft, too quiet to make out clearly. But it was a voice. A familiar voice. Emilia stopped dead in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. "Deku, did you hear that?" Deku nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, it sounded like someone was calling us." They turned around, eyes scanning the empty path behind them. The village was far behind them now, but there was something unsettling about the silence of the forest. The air felt thicker. The shadows seemed to twist unnaturally, and for a split second, Deku could have sworn he saw something move in the distance. Something watching them. And then, as if from nowhere, the voice came again, clear this time. "Deku, Emilia." They both froze. The voice was familiar, but it shouldn't be. Who is that?" Emilia asked, her voice shaking. Before Deku could respond, the ground beneath them shook, a violent tremor that knocked them both off balance. The trees around them began to creak and groan as if the very forest was alive, and the temperature dropped, sending a chill down their spines. Suddenly, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a silhouette they both recognized. It was the cloaked figure from before. "Not everything is as it seems," the figure said, their voice sending a chill through both of them. "And the truth you seek is far more dangerous than you could ever imagine." Deku stepped forward, his fists clenched. "What do you want from us?" The figure tilted its head, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "You'll find out soon enough. But be warned, Deku, some answers are better left unknown." As the figure spoke those words, the ground trembled once more, and before they could react, the figure vanished, swallowed by the shadows, leaving only the eerie silence behind. Deku and Emilia stood there, breathless and uncertain of what had just happened. The voice, the tremor, the figure, all of it left them with more questions than answers. What was the truth behind all of this? And what would they face next? And that's it for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you want more fanfiction like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'll meet you again in the next one. But before I go, just remember, the mystery is far from over, and something big is coming. Stay tuned.